Hey guys, welcome back to another devlog for Infernomon. For those that might be new to the channel and watching this for the first time, Infernomon is a solo game dev project that I'm working on part-time as a hobby. In the game, you will collect a variety of different monsters. You will then build a team with those monsters and then take them into dungeons where you will battle against other Infernomon. And then in between your battles in the dungeons, you will go back to a castle where you will rank up your school professions, which will then help you when you go back into battle and fight more. It is a 2D RPG dungeon crawler, and in short, it takes aspects from Pokemon, Harry Potter, and then dungeon crawling aspects from something like Diablo or the dungeon battles inside of World of Warcraft. In today's video, I will show you the progress that I made with monster evolutions, as well as the feature I've added to edit your attacks. And I'm also changing the way that I'm designing the maps in my game. Before I was going to do procedurally generated dungeons, but now I'm going to be switching that over and doing more of a manual process. So the past few weeks, I have been designing these interfaces that allow you to organize Infernomon in your bag, edit your lineup, and view information about an Infernomon by hovering over them or clicking them to see a more detailed view. These interfaces are nearly complete and I only have a couple more features to add. And the feature I'm probably most excited about is Infernomon evolutions. Once an Infernomon reaches a certain level by gaining experience in dungeon battles, similar to Pokemon, you will have the option of evolving them into a different, more powerful Infernomon. I had this partially working in my last video, but now I'm going to start working on finishing this feature up, so I will start working on that right now. So after a few more days of work, evolutions are now working. If an Infernomon has met the level requirements to evolve, I've gone ahead and added this little indicator here above the Infernomon's level, so you can see these little expanding arrows. Then if you click on that individual Infernomon and open up the individual Infernomon page, you'll see this animated expanding button as well, which I did have this here before. When this button is clicked, it will take you to the evolution screen. At this point, you have about 10 seconds to decide if you want to cancel the evolution. Otherwise, if you let the evolution go through and complete, it will properly save that Infernomon evolution. For the animation for the evolution, I had this partially working in my last video, but one thing I added was this kind of shining spinning ball of light behind the Infernomon. This was actually a free asset I got off of the internet. All I did was change it from pink to white using Game Maker Studio 2's GPU set fog function, and then when they evolve, I gradually increase the size and the brightness over time. So then if you let the evolution finish, you can see the before stats and the after stats, which is one of the things I loved in Pokemon when all of a sudden something like your Charmeleon evolved into a Charizard and your stats got boosted up, and then you start wrecking all the Pokemon that you were previously struggling battling before. And so if you click continue, you can see the evolution properly saves, and you can now use this to Infernomon. Another thing I thought would be interesting to show is this test view. This view is only for me as the developer, and I'll obviously hide the menu when I actually release the game. A couple of buttons I recently added is this conjure every Infernomon button. So when you click this, as you might have guessed, it'll just conjure every Infernomon for me and add them to my inventory. Then I've added these experience buttons, so if I want to give my player or the Infernomon in my game experience, I can do that very quickly without having to go into dungeons and battle Infernomon to get experience over and over. Then you can see I've added a couple other things like granting profession experience, randomly assigning dungeon scores to my Infernomon, and creating held items for your Infernomon, which I'm calling pendants. That will give you stat buffs and a unique battle mechanic as well. The next thing I'll be working on is being able to edit the acquired attack on an Infernomon, so I will get started on that and then update you in a bit. So I finished adding the ability to edit acquired attacks, but before I show that, I want to talk a little bit about the different types of attacks on the Infernomon. So first we have the basic attack, and then we have two natural attacks, and then of course the acquired attack. The basic attacks have a short cooldown, less than 2 seconds long usually, and do a small amount of damage. The other three attacks have longer cooldowns, usually between 5 and 20 seconds, and are more powerful. When an Infernomon is summoned, all of its attacks are chosen at random. So if I go over to my Conjuring Spellbook view, I'm going to be redoing this view in the future to look more like an actual spellbook, but for now this works. So you can see when an Infernomon is summoned, it'll pick one of the two basic attacks, and then it'll pick 2 out of 3 natural attacks. And the basic attacks and natural attacks are unique across the different Infernomon species. So for example, all these attacks on Tadlik are only available to Tadlik, but the acquired attacks are chosen from a pool of attacks that are shared across all the Infernomon of the same attack damage category. So for example, Venonid, you can see all these are all the acquired attacks he can use, and he is a physical assassin. And if I go to Tadlik, he's also a physical assassin, so he has access to all the same acquired attacks. But then if I go to Gobclaw, he is also a physical assassin and has access to all the same acquired attacks. But then if I were to go to someone like Chiropter, who is a special ranged attacker, the acquired attacks that he has access to all do special damage. And then if I open up another special attacker, like Incanimp, and view his available acquired attacks, they're all the same since he is also a special damage attacker. The unique thing about acquired attacks is that they are the only editable attacks on an Infernomon. So once you summon an Infernomon, whichever random basic and natural attacks were chosen are permanent. So these 3 attacks you cannot change. At least that's my plan right now. Maybe I'll change that in the future. If you get some rare item, you might be able to change them. But for now, you can only edit acquired attacks, which you can do so for a small price. So you can see if I click this new edit button, it gives me the option to spend 200 Inferno coins to change my acquired attack. So I'll go ahead and do that. And you can see at the top left, this is my current currency. So it subtracted 200 from my total currency and changed my acquired attack. Also, these Inferno coins are collected by battling in and completing different dungeons. So another thing I've been working on are these attack hovers. So you can see, obviously, when I hover over an attack, there is a wooden background that pops up that shows the attack name, the type of the attack, and the attack damage category, which is either physical or special. And then we have these 4 different icons. The first is how much damage the attack does. The second is the amount of time between each attack. The third is the range of the attack. And the fourth is how long it takes for the attack to cast. And then of course at the bottom we have the attack description. And this time around I've also added another set of test buttons to my testing menu. So if I wanted to grant myself more currency, I can just quickly come here and do that. Next thing I'm going to start working on is designing the first dungeon map in my game, although I do have one last thing I need to work on this individual Infernomon UI, which is the ability to edit an Infernomon's held pendant. But since I've been doing so much UI work lately, I wanted to take a break and work on the dungeons. For now, I just have this placeholder button. When clicked, it just has an empty to-do that just reminds me I need to finish this feature up. So I'll come back to this sometime in the future, but for now I'm going to start working on designing the dungeons. So initially when I started building a game, I thought it would be a good idea to have dungeons be procedurally generated, meaning that each time that you played a dungeon, I would have an algorithm that would create the dungeon and assign and create random rooms, random enemies, which would result in a slightly different experience each time you played the dungeon. And I actually have this slightly working now, so if you load into a level, there are a pool of enemies that will appear. And then if I walk around the room, you can see there's one small room off to the side here, and then an entrance to the next room in the dungeon, as well as another small room. So it'll generate 2 small rooms, and then if I defeat all the dungeon in this room, it will unlock the entrance to the next room in the dungeon. And then if I were to exit this dungeon and restart it, there's slightly different enemies that will appear in the dungeon, although it'll pick from the same pool of enemies, so it'll be somewhat of the same experience. And then, oops, looks like this time the entrance appeared in the exact, or the exit for the room appeared in the exact same location. But if I load in again, Looks like the exit appeared on the right side of the room this time. But just recently I decided that this might not be a good idea due to one competitive element in my game, which is each time you beat a dungeon, it unlocks a higher difficulty of the same dungeon for you to play. So if I were to randomly generate each dungeon, then the difficulty would be slightly different each time you play the dungeon. So that isn't something that I wanted in my game, where the users just cross their fingers and hope they get a good randomly generated dungeon that they can finally beat. So I think that adds an element of luck that's hard to balance. So for now, I've decided that I'm actually going to manually make each dungeon map, and the enemies you battle in each dungeon will stay the same, but just get stronger each time you battle the dungeon. I'm still not 100% sure that I won't go back to the procedurally generated maps. My plan right now is to manually create the first map, release a demo of the game, and then depending on the feedback I get from players, I will decide how I want to generate my dungeon maps going forward. Anyway, if we open up my game in its current state, I've updated the menu at the bottom right. I've also created some icons that look slightly better than my old placeholder icons, and I've shrunk down the size of the menu. I've also added a new menu for selecting the dungeon you want to battle in. So if I open up this view, you can see the 9 different dungeons that are available to battle in the game. Eventually there will be buttons below each dungeon that will allow you to choose the difficulty of the dungeon based on the difficulties that you've unlocked so far. And then above each dungeon, I'll eventually update these names so you don't see the generic dungeon titles I have right now of just Dungeon 1, Dungeon 2, etc. I've also created this ugly placeholder map image for the first dungeon, and it's about 7,000 by 4,000 pixels. I just wanted something created so I can start putting together different dungeon features. And so if I click on this dungeon, I will load into that map. So the idea is I just wanted to just get an ugly map down that I could start testing with enemy patrol paths, programming the distance at which enemies will notice you and start attacking you, start building dungeon boss fight mechanics. And I also want to test map sizes, so my goal is to have each dungeon take somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. So having my test map thrown together will allow me to test these things as well as a few other things. So once I have all that working and I'm more confident in how big I want the map to actually be and where I want the obstacles to be, I will circle back and start designing the map for real and have it look a lot better than it does right now. So that's everything that I have working right now. In the next video, first thing I'll probably start doing is placing the enemies on the map and then working on their patrol paths. But I appreciate all of you who tuned in for this video, and I will see you in the next video.